Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com. Ozcast.
Welcome to Strategikon.
Hello world, I'm John Bruni and you're listening to Strategikon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. From the UK, we are joined once again by Rhoderick Miller. As the Russia-Ukraine war is 10 months old, we check in to see what Rod's hyper-realist perspective says about the war. And as this is the final Strategikon of the year, we investigate what 2023 might bring from an international relations perspective. Rod, welcome back to Strategikon. Rod, let's get underway with a very basic question, but something that'll be quite difficult to unpack. Ukrainian attacks within Russia. Is this a problem, and if not, why not?
It could be a problem, and I think there are people who are trying to make it a problem. Probably in Washington and London, maybe to a less extent Brussels, but definitely London and definitely Washington. Think of it this way, we're on an escalation trajectory, and the Russians are desperate to control the escalation so that they keep their allies on side. The Indians are surprised how good their relationships have evolved with the Russians. The Chinese are being well managed. The Iranians are coming aboard, the Saudis are coming on board. The Russians are doing everything very slowly, very carefully, very managed. And there are elements in the neocon establishment who want to start World War III. Because if they don't, their geopolitical power will go and their personal power will go. So the attacks on Russia matter, but they matter really in how Russia responds to them. And everything I've seen is that the Russians are going to play it cool. They're not going to turn the other cheek, but they're not going to allow the escalator to get out of control. They don't want World War III. They just want to, well, at this point, they want to destroy Ukraine as a geopolitical entity.
Okay, so that sounds great, but in the end, how are you going to prevent this sort of escalation from happening, considering the fact it does not look likely that Kiev and America and Britain in particular are going to go softly on the Russians? There was something really interesting that I found out from a colleague of mine, Frank Ledwidge, who we interviewed on our sister podcast, The Focus, about a week or so back. And he was saying that in an unguarded comment, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin apparently said that the American aim is to bleed Russia. It wasn't to contain Russia. It wasn't to do softly with Russia. It was like literally to bleed Russia with the idea of perhaps toppling Putin's regime. That, I don't care what you say, but if that was even partly true, that's war talk, man. That's not something that we can sit back and take a diplomatic approach to, right?
To that, Angela Merkel did an interview, I think with Bild, in which she basically said that the whole Minsk peace process had just been to buy time to allow the Ukrainians to arm themselves to make war with Russia. There's been the Russian narrative from the beginning. The Russian narrative is not that they are aggressors, but they are fighting a defensive war in defense of the Russian Federation and in defense of Russian people in its neighboring countries. The Russian Mir, the Russian world. I think Angela Merkel is lying at the moment, because I think she was telling the truth when she set up the peace process. She's lying at the moment to defend her reputation in Germany, because everybody's blaming her for the fact that Germany is being broken economically. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the Russians knew this. They said they knew this, and we pretended it wasn't true, even though we had said we were trying to do it for years beforehand. I mean, there are conferences that go on in Europe every now and again about how to divide up Russia and which bits to give to China and which bits to encourage to have independence. We have been naked in our attempts to do this, and then we pretend that Russia is the big baddie. I mean, they are facing existential plots derived from Washington and London, and to a lesser extent from Berlin and Brussels. So Lloyd Austin's slip of the tongue is just validating what the Russians have been saying from the beginning.
Look, before we move on to Germany, and we will touch on Germany, there's been a few interesting developments in that country recently. But David, what are your thoughts with regard to, Ukrainian attacks within Russia? Do you think speaks of a, unbridled escalation to come for 2023?
Let's go back to the last thing Rhoderick was talking about, bleeding Russia out. Again, that is the aim. There is no doubt that is the aim. But it's not a question of working out how to carve up Russia. It's how to bleed the regime sufficiently so the internal desire to get rid of the regime, splits it into at least 10 or 15 pieces, if not probably more, that it will all be small enough to manage independently, and that will all need allies and to get along with people. And of course, China will have an influence over some, the West will have an influence over other, Central Asia will become even more of a disaster area than it already is. And that's to everyone's advantage to get greater access to resources and to have a new version of the great game.
But there's a caveat to that, is that the West misunderstands, and I have tried to say this before, Putin is the moderate. We sell this Navalny guy, who's a petty criminal, as the great liberal opposition. Well, the official opposition, the only people who are going to replace Putin's government,
ultra nationalists who make him look like a pleasant kitty cat,
or commies.
Yeah, well, it's
and
not going to be the
communists
communists.
are just as ultra nationalists.
No, it's not going to be the communists. It will be ultra nationalists, and they will literally lob a nuke and then turn Russia into a bigger version of North Korea for 100 years. That's 2023 in a nutshell.
My suspicion is that 2023 has got very little to do with Russia and a lot to do with internal collapse in the United States of America.
Oh, that's a big
political.
Rhoderick.
No, I don't mean that.
I'm not so convinced about that.
I don't think America is going to cease to exist. I think the cumulative crises and the undeniable scandals are just going to bubble up and bubble up.
The Democrats actually need now to work out a succession plan for 2024. But the fact of the matter is, with Biden, he's no hardcore guy, right? There are people behind him that are pulling the strings. He seems to be a bit of a puppet in terms of where he's positioning things. But as an individual, he's no strong man. But then neither is Donald Trump. I mean, the legal, can I say shitstorm? Well, I've just said it. The legal shitstorm that's surrounding Donald Trump and his family right now are threatening to overwhelm him. So the Republican Party seems to be orientating itself back to something what we would consider normal. I mean, normal-ish. They're moving away from the MAGA hat-wearing crowd. They're moving away from the more extreme elements, and they're starting to take on board people that we would probably traditionally consider Republicans, which is good.
Okay, well, I mean, we've drifted away from Russia, but with the Democrats,
you started the drift.
You did.
I know, my fault. It centers around who gets to run the national committee.
Yeah.
So whether it stays as Romney's daughter, Rachel or somebody, she stopped using Romney because that was a bad name to use for her career, or it will be Hamid Dillon. Hamid Dillon is a very, very competent, in fact, brilliant Republican lawyer from the populist side. The old money GOP have refused to spend money to get the populist candidates into office. They have sabotaged populist candidates, and they have also sabotaged useful campaigns, like
basically broken the brand.
Like in New Jersey and in New York, because their view is, well, these are unwinnable, and they nearly won them. In fact, the reason why there is a majority for the Republicans in Congress at the moment is because of New York. And everyone goes, well, that's because only the New York City is Democrat. The rest of New York State is Republican. And with very little money, they've managed to get a lot more seats in New York and captured a majority. Going back to Russia, theoretically, what we could have is there's a collapse of the Ukrainian government. There's no money, there's very little food, there's no electricity. The Ukrainian government collapses, we don't know what happens. Option number two, the Russian army goes in a big push. That may happen because the Ukrainians just sort of crumble in front of them. That's happened. But the Russians are quite formal in their set of arrangements. They want to slowly move forward and basically grind the Ukrainian armed forces into pieces, which they're doing.
The notion of the Russian offensive and what it may mean, because at the moment what we're seeing from Bakhmut is, as you rightly pointed out, Bakhmut is basically being reduced to a wasteland. And, you know, the idea that the Russians are going to just swamp that area with new recruits, really putting the Ukrainian army on the back foot in terms of just how many more people can they mow down to defend a line or push forward, leads one to argue, what about the Ukrainian counteroffensive? Will it lose momentum? The Ukrainians are losing people. You know, this is something that the Western media just aren't reporting, and it's something that I think that all of us can agree on. You know, there is another story to be told here, but of course, wartime exigencies with regard to, you know, we're backing the Ukrainians, and so therefore we want to keep their morale high. We're not saying too much about the backside end of the Ukrainian story, because that may be a little bit too difficult to report, considering the fact that the truth might actually hurt the war effort for them.
Okay, so let's start with a few points. The first point you say is recruits. Recruits is completely the wrong way of thinking about it. The overwhelming majority of the soldiers being brought in are people who have just left armed service at the end of their contracts. When the Russians put out their recruitment, they were aiming for 300,000. Apparently, they got something like 380,000. And these are not, I mean, these are guys who have been out of uniform for 6 months, maybe 6 years, specialists in particular. These are not some guy straight out of high school. So we're not talking about recruits. The second thing is mowed down. Neither side is using these sort of cliched swarming tactics. The evidence is that the Ukrainians are losing lots and lots of people. There isn't evidence that the Russians are losing lots of people. And when you watch, which you can do on things like Telegram, I mean, this is the most recorded war in history, and we're not seeing the footage on our TVs. When you watch a battle on Telegram, you can see the Ukrainians will lose hundreds, and the Russians might not lose anybody. The Ukrainian soldiers in Bakhmut appear to be basically dragged out of their civilian jobs, put in a uniform, 3 weeks of pointing bayonets at things, and then thrown into a death trap. And they're going up against the Wagner group. I mean, you can't take a guy who was a pastry chef and put him up against some sociopath from Wagner group and expect he's going to live very long. And when you do that on an industrial scale, so Bakhmut is going to fall. The casualties are horrific.
Roderick, what kind of coverage are you getting in the UK about Ukrainian troops being trained there? Like, are you getting more imagery about that there than we get here?
We get the odd picture. There was one in particular, which was some New Zealand special forces doing a haka in front of Ukrainian soldiers who had rocked up, and we were being told that these Ukrainian soldiers were the best of the best, who were being turned into super soldiers. And fanciful. You see the odd parade, and you see the odd soldiers huddled around something, but we're not getting much more photographic evidence than that.
Okay, so it's either a
and
really well-run op or a very small op, and we'll never quite be sure.
my guess is that we have it's for performance sake. The best Ukrainian soldiers are dead, and they have been dead for months. We're just the only ones who aren't dead are the neo-Nazis. So we're basically turning pastry chefs into dead paste for the sake of the cameras.
There's something wrong with the narrative here. I mean, I grant you the fact that the Ukrainian side of the story hasn't been completely covered, and I think that in itself is disturbing, because you would like to think that in a democracy, or a country that claims to be a democracy, freedom of the press would allow people to have a better input into what's going on. But the same thing has been said of the Russians, that people have been press ganging Russians into service, that there have been hundreds of thousands of young military-aged men fleeing Russia.
Well, that's evident. We
because-
certainly do have. We can actually tally them up fairly accurately.
So someone at some point is telling a much larger lie among all the lies that have been spoon-fed to the mainstream media outlets.
Let's try and pick that one to bit, because what we're seeing is white Russians from major cities leaving en masse.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing is rural kids and kids from closer to Central Asia having nowhere else to go, so you might as well go back in the army now with the bonuses. So, the interesting implication here is, of the hundreds of thousands of white Russian kids who've left, how motivated are their parents to continue to run essentially the day-to-day system that makes Russia work? Because now with the kids and grandkids gone, what's their level of commitment where the kids and grandkids don't ever plan to come back?
And there's a deeper level of problem here as well. As these younger people are leaving Russia, the likelihood of them actually, after the war is over, packing up and going back to Russia is quite small. So there's been an economic...
Because when it's ultra-nationalist, there'll be no reason to go back.
Right.
So really, there has to be a mega Russian push and a mega Russian win. Otherwise, there's nothing to go back to.
Well, there will be
There's
nothing to go
two
back to.
caveats there. Firstly, the hundreds of thousands, I think, is way off the mark.
No, talk to
I'd accept
diplomats.
thousands.
That's the real number.
We're not feeling that in Europe. We're not feeling.
You're not feeling it in
100,000.
Europe because they couldn't get visas for Europe.
Well, I know
Georgia,
that's a fact.
If you look
Kazakhstan.
across the developed world,
Mm.
there are Russians everywhere.
Oh yeah,
There are
But
whole
lots of them-
enclaves now in Sri Lanka, for example.
The Russian population of Dubai has also gone up quite significantly
Yeah.
as well.
but we are talking about money people who had their money out of the country anyway.
No,
Um,
we're talking about people who fled with the little bit they had. We're not talking about the elite. We're talking about the people that are meant to keep the electronic world that is Russia going. So competence is going out the window, day-to-day management of a semi-modern economy.
And don't forget the capital flight. There's been some capital flight going
Well,
I'm
on.
less
has there been?
concerned about that, because at the end of the day, they'll just steal everything back.
Well, I was going to say, the capital that's been stolen by the West anyway. There's huge amounts there, and that doesn't seem to have done anything.
Well,
That also
I don't know about
goes
that.
two ways. If you
Yeah.
look at the sheer amount of German investment that quite simply they're starting to realize they're never getting
Oh, yeah.
back, and they're starting to write it off on their balance sheets, really saying the West stole from Russia, when in reality Russia's stealing most of it back.
Um, To be fair, the Russians have been very fastidious about legal processes. Now, you can make an argument, and I have made the argument before, lawyers are like taxi drivers. You pay them enough money, they get you where you want. But they have been fastidious about finding legal ways of justifying it in ways that the West has been sloppy about. Now, maybe that's just a reflection of how sloppy our political leadership is in the West.
Or
as
it's a
opposed
very
to-
convenient way of making sure that you can paint Russia in a way to legitimately bleed it out, which I think is more likely.
And my view is you don't get over the fundamentals. Russia is a huge commodity manufacturer. It's in the top 3 for most food. It's in the top 3 for most minerals. It's not going away. China will buy its stuff. India will buy its stuff.
But the significant thing that's going to change with demographic decline is it will be young Chinese people. Well, actually, not very many young Chinese people, because there aren't many. It's largely going to be young Indian people and young Vietnamese people working in Russia in the mining and agricultural industry. You know, again, we never talk about the proportion of Vietnamese who still go to Russia to work every year because it's a fast way to earn money.
The number of Africans who go to universities in Russia, and they went through a bad stage. Like the old Patrice Lumumba University essentially was completely surrounded and attacked all the time by the locals. But that seems to be tidied up by the Russians, it appears. We'll have this demographic crisis in the developed and semi-developed world. It's only Africa, Indonesia, and India that
Mexico.
Producing
Mexico,
But Mexico's population is aging.
No,
and
the fact that they're getting the
always
25
staying alive.
off of their Coke addiction, their Coca-Cola addiction, means they're getting healthier.
Well, that's also true. In terms of what's going to happen in the next year, we're not going to see a demographic collapse in the next year. That's 5, 10,
but
50.
it's still that interesting question that no one is dealing with, and that is that legitimately there are hundreds of thousands of young Russians now not there whose mums and dads are the last generation of properly educated administrators of conventional economic and engineering life, who now have no reason to care.
I don't know, because Russian universities appear to produce, certainly in the technical areas, massive numbers of people who are highly competent and highly capable. The Russian military-industrial complex, we all thought was a joke, and we were told the Russians are going to run out of missiles in the first 12 days. Well, we're nearly a year later, and they're spurting out missiles left, right, and center.
But we're now largely seeing 1980s maritime missiles being used from land to land, indicating that it's either use up the stockpile before these things wear out, because yes, there is manufacturing, but at what scale and at what speed, and to what extent do they still owe the Chinese and the Indians for long-term contracts?
And then there's the little thing about corruption of those industries themselves, which adds another layer of ineffectiveness.
It's been huge and destroyed effectiveness in most.
But we have the same problem. Not the same problem. We have the same end problem in the West. We have these huge military-industrial complex gargants that suck up money to produce highly, highly complicated weapons that don't work, or work for the first 6 weeks and then need to be completely refurbished. We're not producing the mass product arms and munitions needed to fight a real industrialized war.
We produce, but that is true, Rhoderick. But the only thing that I would say about that is that the Russians are incapable of doing that as well. And
they've also lost it, but for different reasons.
That's right. So basically, we're all in that kind of boat together.
Yeah, we're all getting back to 80s technology together about the middle of next year.
On the battlefield, the Russians are not having technological problems. The Ukrainians are. The Russian equipment works. Ours doesn't. Now, whether that equipment is stockpiled stuff from the 1980s, and the guys in the 1980s were brilliant, whether it's coming out of factories, which appears to be the case, is debatable. But the point of that is, we send, the in-laws and they bounce off of the tanks. We send HIMARS and they run out of munitions. We send the long-range artillery shells, which are brilliant, except they warp the gun muzzles within 3-4 days or worth of firing, and then have to be refurbished. I don't think, with the amount of corruption we have in the West, in the military-industrial complex, we will solve this problem in the next decade, even decade and a half.
All right, so
much less.
So we're seeing a war between two corrupt enterprises, and going back to the
and they can shoot people who mess up. And
let's put it to you this way: Russian artillery being the primary weapon, they're shooting out artillery shells at a rate of knots. Of course, that's going to also have an effect on Russian gun barrels, which also have to be refurbished as well.
Yeah, but they produce so many of them.
of varying quality, I would
The
argue.
Russians are firing more shells in a day than we fired in the first Iraq war, right? The Ukrainians have said they are outnumbered gun-wise between 10 to 1 and 100 to 1 in any scenario. The Russians must have surplus.
Yeah.
For them to be able to be carrying on at this rate, they must be having surplus, they must have supply chains. This couldn't happen just off of, throwing
But the
things
problem
together.
with your argument is that if they've got that much kit, they should be winning.
Right, good
Well,
one, David.
But are they losing?
No,
Because
what it is
the Russian
the
numbers are
normal thing
low.
happened that winter happened, and it's all stalled with some particular places are going to be ground into paste because that's all you can do in winter.
Yep.
I mean, the Russian official view is go slowly, kill everything.
Yeah, but that's because the only way they know how to do war, unless they're persecuting civilians.
In which case, they just basically turn everyone to paste anyway, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't really differ other than the looting and raping.
Yeah. Well, look, the other thing that I'd have to sort of bring to the table here is, you've had the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which has recaptured territory as far as we can tell. That's been independently verified, and it's been quite significant, both in the northeast and in the south. So basically, we can't dismiss that. That's happened. And if the Russians did have some form of tactical or industrial advantage, in that sense, they would not have been able to break through Russian lines. What was this? Just a tactical withdrawal by the Russians?
That's two different things. So what appears to have happened in the north is that they had a tactical retreat. Basically, their lines were overextended in their supply line, and all hell hit the wall in Russia, and huge condemnations of running away from the Ukrainians and so on and so forth. And basically people went apeshit about the northern retreats from Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainians seem to have punched air at huge loss to the Ukrainian forces. And there's some talk about a large number of the forces that were doing the aggressive moves in the north weren't actually Ukrainians, but were, what's the Scott Ritter term? Sheep-dipped Western forces. Kherson is different. Kherson was a trap. The Russians knew they needed to get out. The Ukrainians went in. They hung around for about a day and a half, and they realized if we stay here, it's a trap, and they buggered off. And they have left basically a skeleton crew. Nobody can hold Kherson, and it's to do with the geography. I mean, it's right on the river. On the other side of the river is a whole bunch of Russian artillery. It's going to pulverize anything in the city. But you have to cross the river in order to supply the city. So you can't put any Russians in there because they're vulnerable. And they had paratroopers in there. And paratroopers are great on the assault, but they're terrible troops to use to defend against armor. So you pull out your paratroopers and you leave the city empty. So the Ukrainians march in, they get a flag waving moment, and then they bugger off. It's not grand victory of any sort except for the cameras.
But that's the point. It's looking like a shitty stalemate between one side that is very big and very incompetent, and one side that's very small and dying too fast.
Well, yeah, but look at the death numbers. That's,
Yeah, but I don't care about the death numbers. I care how it ends. At the end of the day, we've got two countries here that are literally, neither set of leadership care less how many people end up dead. So that's irrelevant.
I think the Russians do care.
It's when you run out of bodies or
the Russians do care.
They've never cared.
They can't lose the
numbers.
numbers.
That is delusional that you would expect a KGB colonel to care less.
I don't think it's a moral thing. I think it's a strategic thing. They care about the numbers.
Then you wouldn't have started this war with the demographic decline they've got.
Their view, the view that they espouse is they have no choice.
Yeah, well, that's all, unfortunately, crap. It's the delusion that Putin started drinking the Kool-Aid in 2012 about rebuilding the grand empire and that he can truly be a czar.
I have reservations about that argument.
There's nothing strategic in that. That is just, I want to be big man on campus.
Okay, on that note, let's move on to something else, shall we? I mean, we've covered Russia as much as we possibly can. I think that the last question that I have for both of you guys is, which do you think will come out of this? in 2023 in a better position, Putin or Zelenskyy?
Well, Zelensky's going to get
David.
shot, so...
David first,
Sorry.
then you.
I would expect Putin to be dead by the end of 2023 and to have been replaced with an ultra-right-wing regime that turns Russia into a larger North Korea.
Okay, Rod?
Zelenskyy runs or gets a bullet in the back of his head by either the neo-Nazis that are around him keeping him hostage, or by the regular Ukrainian army who get tired of the neo-Nazis and put bullets in the back of their heads. I think Putin gets to a point where he can call it a victory, and then in 2 or 3 years' time retires and is replaced. And then you have to look at who's the viable replacements. If it's Medvedev, because he's already done the job before, he's going to be far more hardline than Putin. Because, as I keep on saying, people forget, Putin is the moderate in the room.
That's a scary thought indeed. Anyway, let's turn our thoughts to Germany. Germany has been caught in the crosshairs of this war. It has been particularly dependent on its oil and gas from Mother Russia, and actually this was a very long lived policy that certainly has created some problems for the German Republic, the Federal Republic. In terms of how Germany can keep its economy upright without Russian oil and gas, what are your assessments, Rhoderick?
They can't. They've overextended themselves. Germany's going into deindustrialization. I do not see any activity from the German government that's in the slightest way trying to ameliorate that.
Well, hang on. They just spent $500 billion in sourcing new supplies of gas, though. Is that not enough?
No. I mean, they're spending a lot more for a lot less. Germany's best chance is that international criminality figures out a way of selling Russian oil to Germany at slightly more than what they would pay buying it from Russia, which I think they will do, but they need to do it fast. So the oil gets sold to China, China puts it in a boat, calls it Chinese oil, gets sent off maybe to somewhere else, or the oil gets pumped to Turkey. It has to have one more transition point before it gets to Germany. They pay a hell of a lot more, and over 10, 15 years' time, the decay is permanent.
Okay, David, what do you reckon? Do you think that Germany can keep the economy upright?
I think what's interesting is the political elite seem to have drunk the political Kool-Aid of the economy's going green, when in reality, if we look worldwide, not just at Germany, gas development is going through the roof. Like, everyone who can produce more gas is about to produce more gas. West African gas is going to be huge. Finally, we're at a point, that the Leviathan field in the Middle East could legitimately be tapped, and the countries around it would all kill anyone who got in the way because they'd rather be rich than be at war with each other. Natural gas production in America with fracking is going through the roof to the point where they're putting major new pipelines to Mexico and Canada. I really think Germany only has to survive the next 8 months before we are actually in an entirely new world order in terms of energy, and that is a world pretty much running on gas, and gas from every place it can be sourced. The other thing we're already seeing very quietly is the Japanese are in the process of turning their nuclear reactors back on, because the pollution from coal and gas and oil has been so bad since Fukushima. And if the Japanese are thinking of turning nuclear reactors back on, how far behind will the Germans be?
Yeah,
There's an addition to what you've been talking about, which I think is worth noting and probably gone under the radar. It's quite clear that the Russians, now I have to remember which one is which, Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, one of the two, is laying the foundations for beginning a natural gas equivalent of OPEC. And it looks like everybody who's got natural gas is keen.
Very much so, because again, we are not going to a clean green economy. The next 20 to 30 years will predominantly be gas.
Yeah. So if the Russians are basically running that show and they've moved in to kind of run OPEC. They're not calling the shots, but they're certainly laying down the route, and everybody else is saying, "Oh, that's a good route to go down."
Mm.
That's going to be a very different world.
Because there's an awful lot of gas in the world. The problem is you have to put so much infrastructure in. You can't just put it in a bucket. There's no choice.
Yeah.
Renewable energy isn't ready, and the energy demands aren't going down. And the only positive that will come out of a gas-based world is more countries will be rich.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it will be the elites
Yeah.
rather than being any meaningful distribution of wealth.
Well, you can't. Also, the other thing is there's an attempt to create what is effectively a consumers cartel by the Europeans and the Americans, and it's driving the creation of cartel, the formation, the strengthening of the oil cartel, OPEC, and the formation of the gas cartel, because Europe doesn't have this stuff, apart from Britain and Norway.
All
Well,
right.
the interesting thing too in the last 2 weeks, Poland is now on Norwegian gas. So that's an indication of how much has changed in Norway in the last year. That was all slowly happening. But the rate at which Norway have finished the project of being able to supply Poland with huge amounts of gas, has been an indication that, again, every government in the know, whether it's moving to electric cars or not, is getting on board with selling every cubic meter of gas it possibly can.
There are
With regard
concerns
to,
about.
hang on.
I'm going to say that there's concerns about volume and quality of the stuff coming from Norway, in that it's not quite enough and a little too good. That the Russian stuff, which is less good quality, can be turned into more things. I don't understand the physics
science,
of it.
But
the general impression I got was that yes, the Norwegian stuff is really good if you're operating at a high level. But if you're Poland,
but Poland's going to have German equipment, so where's the problem?
Well, yes, it's going to run to Poland, but that's what they wanted for a long time.
So in Germany, we have also seen something else. We've seen an attempted coup by a militia called the Reichsbürger Movement. So, gentlemen, was this a real threat by a hardcore organized group or just a bunch of kooky conspiratorial misfits?
I like that phrase. It's an awesome phrase. Kooky
You
conspiratorial
want to go
misfits.
first?
No, it's a bunch of misfits.
Yeah.
The impression I get is that so you have to understand, AfD and the people who support it are, I mean, they're portrayed as neo-Nazis, but they're much closer to being sort of the soft end of the Tory party or going towards MAGA. They had a problem with actual real Nazis right at the beginning. They seem to have dealt with it. They got them ready. But they're gaining massive political support in Eastern Germany. And sooner or later, they're going to have to be in the government. Alex Salmond, who was the leader of the SNP in Scotland, said, you stay in opposition long enough, eventually you do become the government. And the lesser political parties, who are the ones who are losing the most at the moment, basically want AfD banned. And I suspect this is basically, did you hear about the Whitmer hostage case in America?
No.
Don't ring any bells.
So the governor Whitmer of one of the states, she's a Democrat.
Yeah.
There was an accusation that she was going to be kidnapped by these people, and turned out a majority, and not just a majority, but a significant majority of the people involved in the coup, the kidnap, were federal agents trying to engineer it, and those who weren't were too stupid to rub two pieces of metal together and get a flash. Basically, they picked stupid people, and it just so happened by luck that one of the stupid people knew somebody who was smart enough to get him really good lawyers, and it's sort of fallen apart. It was completely concocted. My guess is that this is in much the same league.
All right, so going off to the other side of Europe, where you're currently sitting, Rhoderick, in the United Kingdom, can Britain keep the lights on without digging up coal? I don't know. The strikes that keep popping up seem to show that Britain has reverted back to a 1960s, 70s class struggle. What's going on?
The problem essentially stems from getting rid of Boris Johnson.
Oh God, you're kidding
Yeah,
me,
but
right?
Boris Johnson, the Tory party realised that you have to be a socially conservative and fiscally left-wing party to win in Britain. And they tweaked this under David Cameron, and they tried going that way, but he was too right-wing. In fact, no, he was too Blairite. And so there was Boris, and Boris did the job, and he got a whopping big majority because he sold social conservatism and he sold fiscal left-wing views. And the Tory party did him in. And then they did in Liz Truss. And maybe the less said about Liz Truss, the better. I don't think she was anywhere near as bad as she was portrayed, but she was too stupid to be prime minister, and they knifed her to death. And they put Rishi Sunak in, who had been rejected. Nobody trusts him. And the Tory party's support is completely collapsed. Labour Party have twigged, we can push strikes, and the strikes will get the next prime minister removed and a Labour government. And that's what they're pushing. In terms of keeping warm, I thought it would be worse than it is. It's really cold. I thought the poverty would be worse than it is. Apparently down in the south it is, but maybe just because in the north we're already prepared for it. It hasn't struck. I mean, we've also had lots of deprivation here for a long time. So maybe we're just already in a position we can soak up the pain. But the south seems to be seriously suffering.
So, David, what do you think about the UK's prospects?
I think what we're seeing is that having swallowed an ideological pill in 1979, that means there's an overlay of ideology on everything that happens in the UK. The gap between the abstraction and the reality gets bigger. So what Roderick's just saying, that everything happening in Parliament is a disaster. Everyone's meant to be suffering, and yet in the streets, people have learnt to cope, because in reality, it's been really horrible for a long time, and people are far more ready to cope than the pundits and the chattering classes give them credit for, because the divide has been so big for so long, and as more people fall out of economic security, there's plenty of people who can teach them how to survive in hard times, because the hard times have been there now for 50 years.
Financial wunderkind Ray Dalio. I'm reading his book on how markets tend to sort of dictate the terms of history and politics and all that kind of thing. It's a well-written tome, and it's an interesting construct. I'm not so convinced of everything that he's put forward, but he tends to think that all of our countries are going through a particular cycle of boom and bust, and we're on the downward cycle, which seems to show that most of the advanced economies, and I will include Russia in this case as an advanced economy, are now on the downward slide. And of course, that's going to lead to a prolonged period of civil unrest, maybe even civil war in certain countries, and a full reordering of the economics within those countries to then come up the other side and move up the trajectory of development yet again. How do you guys see what we're witnessing in the North American, Northeast Asian, and European contexts? Can you see that Dalio was correct in terms of his overarching economic theories and how they pertain to these particular regions going through their conniptions right now? Or is there something else?
You want to go first, David?
Happily. Fundamentally, there's been a lot of people smarter than him who've said history is cyclical.
Yeah.
And the case holds together literally until World War II and only falls to bits after.
Yeah.
And all the people who work out this cyclical stuff try and work out, no, but we're going to be the same. No, we're going to be the same. And they all miss the same fundamental thing that's changed. And in all the earlier cycles, there was always more stuff than there was people. Mm-hmm. And for the first time ever now, there's more people than stuff. So anyone who thinks we're in the same cycle is wrong, because all the smart historians who've tried to prove this and smart economists have all in the end realized their thing doesn't hold water, because something fundamental's changed. And it is something very fundamental. There is now more people than stuff.
Roderick?
I think I have big problems which would take too long to explain with David's assertion. I don't think he's wrong. I think there's problems in the minutiae. My view essentially is, if you dislocate economies from commodities, specifically food, specifically energy, then you can do fantasy stuff and in the end, it's all going to collapse. And that's exactly what has happened. And this is the most important sort of economic argument you can make. Putin saw it, he put it in his thesis, he's running his country on that. You have to link commodities and energy to your economy. They have to be the foundation, not off-sheet balance, fantastical money-making processes. And we have to eventually have an accounting for the money that we've just magicked out of nowhere.
Getting back to what we were discussing earlier with regard to Britain, I'm curious with the idea that, you know, Britain used to be a net energy producer through coal. Do you think things are going to be particularly difficult, which would require the Sunak government to, I don't know, reopen the coal pits in order for them to start generating electricity? I mean, ultimately, the question that I've got here is that, you know, initially we were saying that everyone is looking to gas as the great savior. It won't be the great savior at least until probably midway through 2024 when everything's been bedded down. Yeah. In the meantime, people are going to be freezing. They're not going to be able to heat their homes. They're not going to be able to cook. There are going to be major issues, you know, lining up, especially with regard to Brexit Britain. What will it take for Sunak to consider opening up coal mines and producing electricity from coal as a temporary measure, if nothing else?
There was an attempt and it was sort of blocked. I don't know whether it was blocked in legal terms or just that the chattering classes brouhaha was enough to stymie it. I kind of lost track of the story. I mean, here's the brutal reality. We spend vast amounts of money subsidizing our aristocracy with wind farms that don't work.
Yeah.
We are an island surrounded by waves with lots of rivers, and we spend almost no money on hydroelectrics. Mm. We are in nuclear arms power, and our nuclear factories are decrepit and poorly looked after. Yeah. We are a badly run country, and we have been badly run pretty much since 1945. Mm. There is nobody making good decisions. So a good decision would be open up the coal factories straight away, the coal mines straight away. But we also have no miners. Mm. Yeah, anybody who's got any experience of being a miner is in their 80s.
Yeah. And with even just the equipment, you'd have to buy all the equipment to do it again. So realistically, hydroelectric would probably be the easier thing to sell people, other than the environmental argument that you're going to fill in most nice valleys with nice lakes, which really just makes a bigger valley.
Well, I think so I have seen technology that can basically turn each and every stream, every sort of
into baby hydroelectric. It's amazing.
Yeah. My wife did research on something called biochar, which is this basically attempt to capture, basically to make synthetic coal. Mm. And it was never economically viable because you had to buy the material to make it out of. And I recently saw a documentary about a waste cleansing facility in America, which used sewage as
to basically
the fuel.
Make into like a pretendy coal. It's amazing. Yeah.
And it does everything that the sewage facility is supposed to do: clean the water, get rid of the waste, and it produces 150% energy from the sludge that's produced from this that then can be cooked off as a fuel. I was like, why are we not doing something like that? Now I know that technology is a bit nebulous, but every city in this country, most of the large towns, has some sort of water purification facility. Right? And it's not very complicated technology to build. Even if it's only buying you a little bit of energy, we should be doing things like that. We should be turning most of our waterways we can build windmills. Why can't we build water mills? You know, the big thing is, when I was at Aberdeen, they had these what they called sea worms, which were long buoys with cranks and joints on them that rode on top of the waves, and they produced huge amounts of electricity. But that technology just seemed to have gone into a memory hole and been forgotten.
Well, there are
and
sexier things to look at, though, Roderick. I mean, we've only had word yesterday that apparently the Americans have had a breakthrough in nuclear fusion. Now, I mean, I still think that nuclear fusion, a commercially viable nuclear fusion option, which is the wet dream for most greenies and most sensible people as well, that's still another 50, maybe 100 years down the track before we'll get commercial reactions, or reactors, I should say, deployed in meaningful ways around the world. So I don't know whether or not it's time to celebrate. And I think in the meantime, we really do have to start thinking about, going back into, well, as you say, into the old memory vault and coming out with some certain technologies that are relatively easy to develop in the short term, and even open up the occasional coal field if we can find the technology and the workers necessary, because I don't know how we're going to make up the gap. The whole argument with green technology obviously has always been, if you take coal off the equation, where are you getting your baseload power from? Now, this was an argument up until recently when we were discovering, that gas can basically cheaply, produce electricity at cost, and it's scalable, and that's great. But again, gas-fired plants, they're not green. We're trying to repackage gas as a green.
Well, no, we're not trying.
Energy.
We're just getting on with gas and not bothering to tell the chattering classes that their world will run on gas in 18 months' time. What I think is very significant about this, and it's another interesting thing, like, the incomplete reporting of the war in Ukraine, is the utter incomplete reporting of every important industrial economy in the world has gone, gas, or turn the reactor back on.
Yeah.
And the media just isn't covering it because it doesn't want to.
The heart of our problem, I think, is not, it's not government. Government is a problem. Government is a sort of the big engine of the problem. But our nexus of media and the academy is so rotten. It's producing such intellectually inferior or courageously
challenged.
Courageously challenged. Trying to think of a less cliched way of saying it. We don't produce intellectually brave people. We don't produce people who are prepared to speak up. And those who are so fixated on the deep state, which is a real thing. There's much more nuance than their narrative about it, that they're not doing anything. We have far too much commentariat, says somebody who's actively commenting.
Well, so
but there's lots being done in the chat.
Gentlemen, I have to ask the question: will the EU survive 2023? If so, how? There are multiple crises. I don't see how Brussels can hold the center. Not that it had much of a center to hold on to begin with. It is a cacophony of multiple, deeply riven factions on national and subnational levels. How can something like that actually survive the coming crisis of 2023 with regard to both energy and also food?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
I'll go first if you want, because again, I'm happy to say it for sure. I think it will survive next year for two reasons. One, because the German and French governments can't yet imagine an alternative. And two, because the big thing that's becoming clear with food for next year is if you are in a developed country, you will buy food at an exorbitant price from developed countries, and it will be horrendous. But, other than some rioting in the streets and, small numbers of people dead, people will survive. And that will look so positive compared to what it's going to look like in the developing world, where most of the food got bought from Ukraine and Russia. So we're going to have very much a two-speed economy next year of Europe will be able to afford to throw money at buying expensive food. And that's part of how it will hold together, because it will just do it. Whereas so much of the world won't be able to afford to buy that expensive food, and affordable food won't be available.
Well, I hear that the Africans are really having problems at the moment trying to work out how they're going to navigate through next year. I've heard numbers that they may lose up to 200 million people through starvation, a multiple famine on the continent.
Next year is looking like the worst year in Ethiopia, 80s, all over the continent.
Speaking as the Zimbabwean in the room, two things. You'd be surprised how well Africa can adapt. I think a large part of the reason why there will be problems is that Africa has actually massively improved in the last 20 years. And so it's produced a class of people who don't live on the land, who don't know the land. I think that will be terrible, but I do think that will also be temporary. And, Zimbabwe was a highly affluent society by African standards, and it was at the bottom end of the developed world in the 1960s. And after 20 years of misrule, it's still ticking. And I think that applies to the Africans as well as the Europeans.
Roderick, do you think with Africa it might be a bit like what AIDS did, where it takes out all the young educated people? Because again, it's the young educated people in the cities that again are the ones who aren't going to be able to afford food and can't grow food. So this is essentially going to be like, zap intellectual and economic development again?
I don't know. I can't speak for all of Africa. I can speak some knowledge of the southern components of Africa. So I think what will probably happen in Mozambique is pretty much nothing. The Mozambicans produce enough food domestically.
They'll just bumble along because they always bumble along.
They'll bumble along. Zambia could be where things get really bad because their population is exploding. And Zambia is very, very dry. So if they have a drought and they've got nowhere to pull food from, and they do pull food from the Russians and Ukrainians anyway. South Africa is hyper affluent, armed to the teeth. It does produce a lot of its own food. Maybe it's food sufficient.
It'd be pretty close, I reckon.
But my concern for South Africa is not people starving. It's open warfare. There's so much left. Colonialism and apartheid and the post-apartheid rainbow nation all damped down on lots of pre-colonial wars and pre-colonial power struggles that are just sitting there in the shadows. And I don't know, and I don't think South Africa has had the real sort of nation-building process that has unbound the differences between particularly the Black African community. I don't mean white versus Black or non-Black versus Black. I mean
all the various communities within Black South Africa.
Yeah, and I'm thinking specific about the Zulus and KwaZulu-Natal and its problem with whether it wants to be an independent country or whether it wants to be the center of South Africa. But also you've got Ndebele up in Limpopo province. Do they want to be part of the greater Ndebele kingdom again and take southern Zimbabwe, and can they even do that? And it's really messy and complicated. Botswana is very, very affluent, ridiculously dry. I really worry for Botswana, but then again, it's a tiny population.
They can buy food with the amount of mineral wealth, I would imagine.
Namibia is Botswana on steroids. If Botswana can't cope, Namibia will be worse. If Botswana does cope, Namibia will be better. And then you have Angola. And Angola is the big question, because Angola could rip itself to pieces in civil war. Angola has a big race problem, which is not white versus Black, but mixed race versus Black, and the mixed race aristocracy that basically governs and misgoverns Angola. Who knows? I mean, that's all it needs is something to rip it apart. And there's a lot of bad blood left over from their civil war. There's a lot of bad blood with the West, with the way we stabbed Savimbi in the back because we decided peace was better than supporting our allies. So I don't know. It's immensely complicated. North of Congo, I begin to move out of my sort of confidence area. Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, all of them should feed themselves, but all of them have the same problem that if that doesn't happen, their internal rivalries can just turn into bloodshed. And then you have Congo, and Congo doesn't work at the best of times. Maybe it just doesn't feel the speed bump of the next couple of years, or maybe it feels it on a scale that nobody's seen before. And the closest thing to World War V, because I would count Korea as World War III, and I would count the Cold War as World War IV. The closest thing to World War V was
African Great
was
Lakes.
in the war in the Congo, which I did my master's on.
Yep.
And with very few soldiers dying, something like 12 million people died. And that was starvation, that was disease. There was a lot of that was AIDS with the rampaging forces. So if it gets bad in Africa, it will get very, very bad in the southern bit. But it's possible they just walk over it.
I'm just really happy that, the fighting in Ethiopia seems to have settled down for the moment. And, whether or not it prevails, whether peace prevails is anyone's guess. But I think from a human perspective, Ethiopia has every capacity to look after itself if it is governed well. Ethiopia's main problem hasn't been resources. Anyone that's been to Ethiopia and has seen the highlands of that country knows that's rich soil. They could feed literally the Middle East and most of North Africa just out of what they've got. The problem, of course, is mismanagement, international rivalries with countries like Egypt and Somalia, drain those resources and distract the governing elite in Addis Ababa, and prevents them from doing the right thing by their people. And quite frankly, as we've mentioned, both on Strategikon as well as on our other podcast, there is this issue of Ethiopia being the last empire or imperial system. It's one of those places where it hasn't moved into modernity from a political perspective at all. It still hangs on to a sort of fiefdom kind of structure, and it needs to move with the times. It hasn't done that. So, Ethiopia is a bit of a, country on a dime right now. Just toss it and see where it goes.
Going back to the question of Europe and the EU, I think they'll muddle through the next couple of years, but there's the big problem of highly likely that they're starting a war in Serbia/Kosovo. And I don't know what plays with that, because we're all assuming it'll be a rerun of the last time, or that the Serbians will capitulate. And I'm not sure that's true after what's happened in the last year and how ineffectual the West has looked with external eyes. I mean, we consume Western media, so it's very hard for us to see. But I keep an eye out on non-Western people who I trust, and they all seem to think we're in terminal decline.
That's been around for a long time now. Even when times were good, the East or the Orient used to always say, we in the West are no good, and we're all effete, effeminists running around the place, doing strange and weird, peculiar things. We're not manly enough to take the cudgels by the horn and drive things forward.
Very few Africans.
I've heard.
Very few Africans ever held that view. Only really the
Russians, the Chinese, and some people in the developing countries have had that view as well. Those who have their sympathies toward the Russians and the Chinese, they do share that view. I've heard it a number of times. But the thing is that now the Great Leveler event is going to be upon us in 2023. But I'd like to now turn our attention to our final point, which is China. Now, in China, COVID is as much of a problem now as it was when it first started. Lockdowns that temporarily kept things under control have now turned into long-term social repression, with people locked away for weeks at a time. Public antipathy, even downright hostility against Chinese Premier Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party has swept through the country. Just as Xi secured his third term, Biden's Chip Act clipped China's technological wings and arguably has crippled the country's capacity to fight a high-intensity war, since most of China's military hardware requires high-specification chips and semiconductors. In one of our earlier episodes with you, Rod, you seemed pretty confident that a Sino-American shooting war was on the cards. What are the chances now for a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
I don't think it'll happen. I think the internal problems are just too big now.
Yeah.
I don't think it will happen because the old Kuomintang, the Chiang Kai-shek's party, which is very pro-reunification, is on the ascension, and the Taiwanese an element within Taiwan wants reunification. I'm also going to say, before the war in Russia, the war between Russia and Ukraine started, I thought the Chinese might start the war because they were running out of time demographically, and because opposition to unification was in the ascension. During the war, I began to take the view that actually it was the Americans who were trying to provoke it. And I think that's true. The Americans were. Elements within America were trying to provoke it. I now think it's off the tables for everybody. I think the grown-ups in America have asserted, no, take this off the table. And the Chinese realize they can do it. I think they've always realized this, but we didn't know that they recognized it, that they can just do it with time, that Taiwan is economically being bound into China. Kuomintang will become the ruling party again, and they'll get what they want without a shooting match. So, time.
Okay, well, anyway, everyone, that's a wrap. My thanks to our special guest, Rhoderick Miller, for being on Strategikon with us. My thanks to co-host David Olney and to producer Michael Migali for their contributions. And to our audience, thanks for listening. And as this is our last Strategikon for the year, David, Michael, and me, John Bruni, wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Let's hope things don't turn out as badly as predicted. Join us in 2023 for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you can subscribe to the audio version of Strategikon through the Ozcast Network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International site, sageinternational.com.au, hitting the media drop-down button and clicking podcasts. Also, please like us on the Sage International Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. All your likes and subscriptions will help the algorithm find us and bump us up the social media rankings. You can also watch our podcasts on video through the Strategikon Raw YouTube channel. Also, comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, goodbye.
Ozcast. Connect with your potential customers wherever they are. Effective uses Comcast viewership data insights to combine advanced targeting capabilities with premium TV and streaming content, so you can deliver the best ad experiences to your audience no matter how they watch. Visit EFFECTV.com.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.